So here we are with our study from this year. Now, Viv, if you want to go into the key insights, and then I can take it from the methodology.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. So we always try and, like, from a learning heroes point of view, put our heads together, kick the tires, look at the data. These are sort of three big takeaways that stood out for us because we wanted them to be as actionable as possible. So really encourage you to think about your own other takeaways and share them with us, challenge these. These are sort of where we're starting from. But one thing that really, this started in September, and we saw it again very, clearly in this data. Parents, teachers, and principals are united. They are not divided. We continue to see the media pull parents and educators apart in very polarizing and kind of scary ways, quite frankly. We do not see that. We see that there is incredible alignment, and that, families, parents, teachers, and principals see family engagement and equity as essential for student success. So for us, it's, the call to action is let's find ways to bring parents and teachers together and not pull them apart. Secondly, while that's really inspiring, like, good news is that we have a lot of alignment. However, we still have some significant barriers to face, especially as we think about COVID recovery and all of the just dramatic learning loss that we've seen through the data. I mean, I was at a Chiefs meeting last week where they were showing 17 months of that would be required for some students to make up in addition to their normal instructional time in a year. So 17 months behind, really stark, scary numbers. Yet we see great inflation, inconsistent parent-teacher communication, just not having access to all the measures available for parents. They still have this very kind of overly rosy view of their children's progress, which we believe will put these learning recoveries at risk. So with that, we, again, trying to encourage more connections. But ending on a good news note, the answers are really hidden in plain sight. We do know the way forward. This work is being done in districts all across the country and lots of creative and innovative ways. It's not one size fits all, but the roadmaps do exist. And our, colleague Eyal is leading this work for us to work with districts on how to put these different structures and systems in place. So we're excited that this, I think data really can demonstrate to districts that the foundations are there. They just need to think differently and put some strategies in place. So with that, those were kind of our big, three key takeaways. Again, really encourage all of you to absorb the data and over time come back to us, and please do share what you're seeing in all of this, because we think there's just a lot more to uncover and unpack as we dig into the data. So with that, I will turn it back to Adam to take us through the data. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Viv, and it truly is a pleasure to be with you all today, and also to be able to collaborate with Learning Heroes on such important topics. Want to share with you the methodology that went into this study. Very, very robust study, including a survey among parents as well as educators. Parent survey, over 1,400 parents and guardians of children in public school, K-12, fielded, as Viv mentioned, April to early May. It was offered in English and Spanish. We also included some oversamples, which means just additional survey completed interviews among Black and Hispanic parents so that we could look at those audiences with greater statistical validity. All the data were weighted to be representative of public school parents in the US. The educator survey, 300 teachers, 317 principals in public schools, again, K-12, fielded mid-April to mid-May. And again, those data were weighted to be reflective of those audiences too. You'll also see data from previous Learning Heroes studies back to 2019. And you'll see statistically significant differences highlighted a couple different ways. One, in terms of blue and red font to show higher or lower differences between audiences, green and red arrows to show statistically significant differences when compared to the most recent data as well. In addition to this quantitative methodology, we also conducted some qualitative efforts to help inform this study on family engagement. We conducted some bulletin boards to get a sense of parent perspectives over time qualitatively, including English-speaking parents, Spanish-speaking parents, parents of charter school students, and you'll see that context in the results as well. So with that methodology in our rear view mirror, let's jump into the data, and we'll start with the mindsets that really do help to set the stage for this equity-centered engagement that Bib introduced in those key insights. And we'll start with parents' hopes and dreams and asking them, how important is it to you that your child goes to college? And we see here the percent of parents who say it's absolutely essential, very important. 77% feel that way. And that number very consistent as we look back to 2019. When we look at some of the key subgroups, we notice that Hispanic parents, that number is a little bit higher, 87%. We see white parents statistically significantly lower and at a number that is lower from September 21, as you can see on the screen. But even so, 7 in 10 white parents find it's absolutely essential or very important that their child goes to college. Now, we also asked about parent confidence that their child will be successful, to be prepared for entrance into and be successful in college upon graduation from high school. And again, large number here, 3/4 of parents saying that they are extremely or very confident. We see results consistent across race and ethnicity. A few areas where parents are a little bit more confident, we see that among charter school parents, parents of elementary school students, and parents in households whose household incomes are $100,000 a year or more. Now, even with these high levels of confidence, we also know that there are several worries that are front and center, and our survey included those as well. What you see on the screen here are the results of what we say top 2-box responses to the question, how much do you worry about each of the following as a parent? We added worry a lot and worry some, and as you look at that top tier in that blue rectangle, that's where we have at least 6 in 10 parents or more saying that they're worried a lot or worried some about these items. At the top, having politicians who are not educators making decisions about what students learn in the classroom. That was number 1 in the previous iteration, stays at that top spot for us for this iteration as well. Joined by, in this top tier, your child's happiness and emotional well-being, your child experiencing stress or anxiety, and your child being exposed to violence at school. As we've also seen in previous years, Hispanic parents more likely to indicate that they're worried about these items than their counterparts. I'll also note that the COVID concerns are down considerably. You have to go towards the bottom of the list to see someone in your family getting COVID, but still half of parents indicating they worry a lot or worry some about that item. And I want to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen as well, where you see your child's math skills, your child's reading skills at 42% and 39% respectively. I want you to keep that data in mind, especially as we start to look at parent perspectives on their children's academic achievement and summer supports. It's some foreshadowing that we have this presentation, and I look forward to your thoughts when we get to that additional data. But before we get there, I want to share with you what are educators worried about. And here you see, again, a worry battery that's among educators with teachers in green, principals in yellow. As we saw last year, teachers a bit more worried among these items than principals, especially among those top tier items, perhaps because more of these focus on their day-to-day a bit more than principals. But if we look in that top tier, we see a lot of items that are similar to what we looked at on that previous slide. Students' happiness and emotional well-being. But we see a new one here in this second spot among teachers, your students' reading skills. Interesting that that number is a bit higher for teachers than math skills. Both of those items pretty similar when we look at the principals indicating their level of worry about that. Also rises to this top tier challenges that your students face at home, food service insecurity, poverty, but also having politicians who are not involved in education making decisions about curriculum. 70% among teachers, but 2/3 of principals. This is actually the number 1 worry on this list for principals. You'll also note the COVID-related concerns down towards the bottom of the list. And it's important to note that these questions were asked before the tragedy of Uvalde, likely would see some different results, especially to the safety of their students during the school day. But with this backdrop, let's transition to family engagement. And we'll start with parents and educator involvement, asking them to compare their involvement with during the school year that just ended to the previous one. And we see that almost 9 in 10 parents say they were just as involved or more involved for this school year that just ended compared to the previous one. And we see high percentages among teachers and principals indicating that their time and effort on family engagement has been at least as much or more than that previous year. Now, this year's study does take a deep dive into activities parents can take. And we'll start with this first slide that shows the results from 2 questions that were split sample. One, we asked parents if they took an action during this school year and whether or not they'd be very or somewhat likely to do so in the next school year. And we see a great deal of consistency, especially towards the left side of the screen. We look at finding more time to talk to my children about their assignments, getting a better understanding of what their child is expected to learn at their grade level, seeking a better understanding of where their child is academically. We have about 8 in 10 saying they did it this past year, they're very or somewhat likely to do it next year. And when we look at these items across race and ethnicity, we do see some relative consistency. There are some areas where white parents are reporting lower numbers than their counterparts. But what's also interesting about this slide is what you see on the right, where we see the biggest difference between what parents say they did and what they are going to do. Where just under half said that they demanded that our school provide better support for students' mental health and emotional well-being going forward, but 6 in 10 indicating that they are very or likely somewhat to do so in the next year. Now, this slide represents a first cut of parent involvement. We also asked about where parents feel they should have a say. And if you look at that blue line, we asked parents, this is a top box response, where they definitely want to have a say in the areas you see at the bottom of the screen, ranging from providing feedback on how the school or district spends COVID recovery funds. 47% of parents say they definitely want to have a say there, voicing their feelings about school curriculum at a school board meeting, providing feedback on the list of recommended books, 46% for those. You can see the rest of the percentages, but that's where parents say, you know what, I definitely want to have a say in these areas. But we also asked, okay, which of these have you actually done in the past school year? They could select all that apply, but before we get to that, I should note there are some limited differences across race and ethnicity. When we look at the items that parents say that they have done, the first thing that jumps out is 45% say they've done none of them, none of the above, and it's up to 49% among white parents saying that they've done none of the above. So we see that these percentages get to be pretty small as we look across the items that were included in this battery. And for me, there are 2 really key takeaways on this slide. First is that parents want the opportunity. They want the fact that the door is open if they want to share their opinion, that they can. But they won't necessarily take this action. And that's really a small percentage of parents who are causing the problems, who are taking these actions. Parents more want the opportunity to do so if something arises that they want to take that action. Now, we also looked at these data to say, who are the parents who are disproportionately or index more highly to take these actions? And we looked at those who have taken at least 3 of those actions, or at least say they did in the past year. And they tend to be, first, elementary school parents, more so, especially compared to high school parents, those with a college degree or higher education, those with higher income levels, $100,000 a year household income or higher. Now, we also asked educators, where do they think parents should have a say? And you'll see the blue line for parents is the exact same blue line that we showed on the previous slide, green and yellow to show the teachers and principals. And for the most part, for most of these items, we have just under half, or in some cases over half, of educators thinking that parents should have a say in these areas. But it's also important to note where they're less enthused, where there's less energy around that. And that's reviewing teachers' daily lesson plans and suggesting changes to textbooks that the children will use during the school year. So those are attitudes about where parents should have a say, but what about how these audiences work together? Family engagement. Specifically, on the screen, you see a small battery of items where we ask parents the extent to which they agree or disagree with these statements about family engagement. The bars represent the percent who strongly and somewhat agree, and you see high levels of agreement truly across the board on these items, especially when it comes to what families and teachers need to do to help overcome the pandemic's impact on learning. The top one, it'll be essential for families and teachers to work closely together. 89%, that item was split sampled with, it'll be essential for families and teachers to trust each other, both to help overcome the pandemic's impact on learning. That latter item, 84%, still showing that they strongly or somewhat agree with that item. Teachers and schools engaging with families is essential to helping students succeed. 88% agree. And that all teachers, staff, and school leadership have a role to play when it comes to family engagement. Still, over 8 in 10 parents strongly or somewhat agree with that statement, and the numbers very consistent across race and ethnicity. When we look at these attitudes among educators, they absolutely agree as well. And the items in the yellow rectangle are those top box items from the previous slide, from what parents told us, and you see what rises to the top among educators. The same, essential for family and teachers to trust, to work closely together. Teachers, staff, and school leadership have a role to play, and that family engagement is essential to helping students succeed. So in a nutshell, we asked about family engagement in several ways, and educators agree that's extremely important. But we also went a little bit of a step further. If you look at the bottom of the screen, we also asked, it is unrealistic that teachers connect with families of all their students. It's just too much to ask. Well, even though we know that teachers are strapped for time, and even in the way this question is worded, we see a minority of teachers agreeing with this statement, only 44%. They understand the importance of family engagement and the power of family engagement. We also asked about other related aspects, and Bib alluded to these in the open during the review of the insights, focusing specifically on equity and bias. I'll start with equity with two items that were split sampled there at the top of the screen. Agreement with the statement, equity is necessary for student success. That statement on its own receives over 8 in 10 strongly or somewhat agreement with teachers and principals. Less so, 76% among parents, but still a relatively high number. But compare that to its split sample, where we included a definition, and of course there are several definitions for equity. This is the one Learning Heroes developed for this study. So equity, meaning that every student receives the support to thrive based on their individual needs that is necessary for student success. There, we see similar percentages among teachers and principals, but the number jumps to 88% among parents, a 12-point increase when we include that definition of equity. When we shift to bias, we'll look at the item on the bottom of the screen. Agreement with the statement, more support is needed to help staff members identify and work through biases they may have when trying to communicate with parents. Here we see a little bit of a difference, with principals statistically significantly more likely to agree with this statement than teachers, and parents in the same ballpark as principals for sure. But very interesting if we look at the differences across race and ethnicity on these items. And here we see white parents less likely to agree with these items, all except one. And that's the one that included that definition of equity that I read to you earlier. So these findings set the stage for more exploration into family engagement. And I'm going to pass it over to Eyal, who's really going to discuss findings that focus on building trust.
Thank you, Adam. So this set of questions comes from a desire to dig deeper into this question of trust. We know that trust is central to any effective homeschool partnership. And we know from research from Anthony Breich and Barbara Schneider in Chicago that schools with high levels of what they called relational trust were far more likely to improve over the duration of their 10-year study. And to dig into trust, what does trust mean? They provide us with 4 characteristics: the presence of integrity, respect, personal regard, and competence. In other words, I, as a parent, am more likely to trust a teacher when I feel that they keep their word or that they care about me as a person. And similarly, teachers to parents, teachers to teachers, principals to everybody. So this is a helpful way of categorizing and understanding more deeply what is meant by trust. And so we ask teachers to rate the job that they do in each of these areas. So rate the job that you do in keeping your word with your students' families. Rate the job that you do in showing your families, that students' families, that you care about them as people. And by and large, teachers rated themselves quite highly. So about 3 out of 4, nearly 70 to 75% rated themselves either excellent or very good on most of these constructs. And we also asked parents to rate the job that they feel that their teacher is doing in keeping their word, in helping them feel heard and valued. And by and large, parents, around 60 to 65% are saying excellent or very good. It's pretty consistent across the 4 constructs for parents. And in general, it's about 10 to 15 points lower than what teachers rate themselves on most of these constructs. We also asked parents, we also asked all 3 groups to rank order each of these components. So which one is most important and which one is least important. Now, that doesn't mean that they're unimportant. It's just a rank ordering to understand which one rises to the top. And for all groups across the board, helping parents feel heard and valued, or a sign of respect, rises to the top. And for parents, having teachers keeping their word, or a sign of integrity, is right up there. It's tied with making them feel heard or valued. So this is an important takeaway. This is the first time that we've asked these questions, and we're going to be digging more deeply into these in subsequent rounds of research. But the last point I'll just point out is, in the previous slide, we saw that 73% of teachers rated themselves either excellent or very good in helping families feel heard, which is what parents prioritize the most. So whereas it's 73% rated themselves excellent or very good, it's only 28% that rated themselves as excellent on this area.
And I'll dive in starting with results from those bulletin boards that I mentioned at the open, where we asked parents in these bulletin boards, what makes it difficult to have strong communication with teachers? And they identified 4 areas, four obstacles, whether it's that the teachers predominantly communicate when there's a problem, they feel or see that educators really stretch too thin, they don't really have the time to do it, that there's no consistent communication, and they put some of the blame on themselves too. That's from both sides, but also that parents feel that they need to be that connective tissue. They have to connect the dots, especially if they have to keep multiple players, be the principal, guidance counselor, teachers up to speed about what's going on with the child's education. We see the quote at the bottom right, where we also have this respondent saying the teachers are not proactive about communicating how their children are doing academically, and they as parents feel that they have to take the lead on that. So we use that idea about academics as a launch point into getting a sense of how confident do parents feel that they have that clear understanding of how well their child is doing academically. And we see that parents, they feel extremely or very confident that they have that clear understanding. 86% noting that top 2 box, extremely or very confident. Very consistent data, especially compared to our last survey iteration. Very consistent across race and ethnicity, and very different from what teachers say, where less than 6 in 10 teachers think most or all of their students' parents have that clear understanding. And oh, by the way, that number is down 11 points just from September 2021. But parents feel confident. So with that confidence, the next step there is really to make sure that we get a sense of where are they getting their information, how are they drawing their conclusions about their child's academic achievement, and compare that to what teachers would recommend. So we asked teachers from a list below, select the 4 most helpful sources of information to let you know whether or not a student is performing at grade level. And we see what rises to the top is the teachers' in-class observations. We see classroom tests and quizzes, their interactions with the student, benchmark tests and student year-end tests round out the top 5. And then we see report card grades, homework, and parent feedback at the bottom. When we ask parents, report card grades are number 1. So comparatively, that's number 1 for parents. That's number 6 for teachers. Parents do value that written or verbal feedback from the teacher, but truly those report card grades, that's where parents are indicating that they are getting the sense of how well their child is achieving. So that begs the question, well, what are they seeing in those report cards? Well, consistently, year over year in our recent surveys, they're seeing B's or better. 84% of parents saying their kids get B's or better on their report cards, relatively consistent across race and ethnicity, so we do see a little bit of a drop among Black parents, 79%, but still high percentages of parents saying that their children are getting B's or better. So then we ask also, and this is to Tracy's point, and Bibb was alluding to this as well, so where's your child performing in math and reading? At, above, or below grade level? And yet again, 9 in 10 parents indicating that their child is at or above grade level in reading and math. And if we look at the percentage who are at grade level, we do see some positive news here where that percentage has increased since 2019, up 6 points in math and up 8 points in reading. So that means the numbers for above grade level have been dropping. So that's good. But still, that 9 and 10 is just not realistic and not accurate compared to what we know that's going on in the classroom. This is one of Learning Heroes' primary metrics. It's also been a key challenge to try to get a sense of how can we break through? How can we get parents to have a clear, accurate understanding of how well their children are doing? And took a different approach this year than we had in previous years. We gave all survey respondents, all parents, a scenario. And we said, okay, imagine that you receive the following information. Your child has a B on their report card in math. Year-end state test results say they're below grade level in math. And if you look at your child's results in other standardized tests, they also indicate that your child is below grade level in math. So we share all this information and ask, okay, how do you think your child is performing, at, above, or below grade level? And with this information, we're at 51% of parents saying they're below grade level. This is a colossal change, especially from the previous slide. It was 8% of parents who said their child was below grade level when initially asked. So when providing this information, the report card grade, but also year-end state tests, standardized test scores, together to help parents get a sense of what's going on, they can change their perceptions. And we also asked parents, well, how would you feel about this? Well, a majority said, you know what, I'm going to be concerned. I'd be extremely or very concerned if this was the case when it came to how my child was achieving, and this is the information that I received. Now, we took this scenario a step further and said, okay, here again is the scenario. What would you do? What are the actions that you would take? What would you definitely do? We have over 7 in 10, close to 3/4 saying that they would talk to their child, but also 60% of parents said that they would talk to their teacher to co-create a plan to support their child's learning. They want that solution. They want to be involved in that solution. We see that Black parents are significantly more likely to indicate that's the case than their white counterparts, but still large percentages saying that they want to co-create a plan, get that solution in place. Now, I want to look at this idea of a plan in a little bit of a different way. And we asked parents if their child's teacher has worked with them to develop a plan for how their child will make up any learning lost because of school closures during the pandemic. And 46% said yes. So just under majority, but not a majority, said yes, that this was happening. So I'm going to take a half step back and let's take a look at parent perspective, the parent point of view for a second. So 9 in 10 think their child is at or above grade level. We have less than half, 46%, who said their teachers are working with them to make up for learning loss. We also know about communication barriers with teachers and parents. With all of that happening together, is it so much of a surprise that the bottom two worries for parents that I showed earlier in the presentation were reading skills and math skills? The results from the scenario question suggest that if parents know what's going on and the data are presented in a straightforward way from multiple sources, they would want to take action. But the key is if they know they need to take action. And that's an important segue to looking at what these parents want to do with their children over the summer. At the top, we've seen this consistently during COVID as well, ensuring the child spends quality time with family and friends, 55%, very important for parents. Also focusing on child social emotional development, 48%. Those two rise to the top. But then as we move down this battery of items, then we start to see reading and writing skills, math skills, less than a majority. Then we get to some really small numbers when we look at connecting with the child's teacher at the end of the school year to talk about what help the child might need, 29%. And then when we look at items about tutoring specifically, enrolling their child in a summer tutoring program, signing their child up for private tutoring, we're at 16% and 12% respectively. I want to say one more point about tutoring from the educator perspective. And we asked educators which of these options should the school consider for providing additional academic supports to students. And the results pretty much indicated that what can happen in the building they thought would be most useful. So using federal pandemic recovery funding to pay for tutoring programs at school, 54% of teachers identified that one. Half of teachers and half of principals said using school technology to have virtual online tutoring sessions again while the students are in the school building. At the bottom, the option to add more time to the school day for teachers, asking teachers to add tutoring to their day before, after school, or during breaks. We have small percentages, 37% and 41% of teachers and principals respectively, identifying that as an item. So with this way forward, we're going to start with a slide that shows that, again, another way in which educators and parents are aligned, especially teachers and parents when it comes to how the child's school should engage or communicate with parents. And it's really about being direct and truthful and authentic. It's about building trust. It's about making sure that parents have that clear picture. But some data from our last study in 2021 uncovered some areas where we can understand why this might be a little difficult. First, when we look at just what seemed to be a simple question of who has a primary responsibility for family engagement at their school, we see that there's no consensus among teachers and principals. Teachers think it's pretty much the teacher whose primary responsibility. The principal, a little bit more split, but still a plurality of principals indicate that it's the principal. So we have a little bit of a disconnect there. And then that study from last year also asked, well, where are you getting trained? What's influenced your approach to family engagement? And what we know is that it's informal. The blue box indicates all these areas in which the most frequently selected areas that have been influenced approach to family engagement. And it's teachers working with each other, it's teachers or principals developing their own approach, working with student families, whereas the more formalized training is well below where that blue box is. You have to look at the red for professional development courses, as well as working with professors or college degree programs. But if we jump back to the results from this study in 2022, we also look at what structures teachers and principals say are in place, the structures and supports in place for family engagement, whether it's time reserved during the school day, during the contractual school day for teachers to connect with families, that there's the central office leadership team who oversees family engagement. Someone has that as their primary job responsibility, and then specific standards for family engagement. We see consistent results among teachers and principals. What we also see is that these numbers aren't really that high, that we're looking at just over half or 6 in 10, indicating that they have these elements in place, and they're more likely to be in place in middle school and high schools than the elementary school educators saying that they're in place. So simply put, these supports aren't there in the way that they should be. And when we have these structural gaps, is it that surprising that there are issues to overcome, issues such as issues of race and bias when it comes to this topic? We look at the agree, disagree statement at the top of the screen. We asked educators, I think I do a good job understanding my students' family values, culture, and the way they're being raised. We asked parents whether they agree or disagree, whether they think that their child's teacher understands their family values, culture, and the way that these parents raise their children. And we see that teachers and principals think they're doing a good job, over 8 in 10. Strongly or somewhat agree with that statement. Only 65%, just under 2/3 of parents agree with that statement. It's a 20-point difference when you look at that teacher number versus that parent number. Focusing on educators specifically, seeing if educators agree with the statement that some educators find it more difficult to communicate with a parent or family member who is different from them in terms of race, ethnicity, or background. And these educators self-report that, yeah, they think that's the case, to the tune of about 7 in 10 across those audiences agreeing. And then we see an interesting difference among principals and teachers, with agreement with some educators having lower expectations of students who are different from them. Again, in terms of race, ethnicity, or background, where only 59% of teachers agree with that statement, but almost 3/4 of principals do so. Now, in fairness to teachers, we also asked, are these elements easy for you to do? How challenging might they be? We focused on specific areas of family engagement, whether it's establishing strong relationships with families, communicating difficult information to families, communicating when the native language is not English, and then also reaching families that the school has not been able to reach in the past. You see on the screen the results from this 5-point scale, from very easy or easy in the blue to the responses that are not in those easy categories in the yellow, orange, and red. And we look at those latter categories, teachers are telling us this stuff is not easy for them, especially these latter 3 categories where we have a majority of teachers to over 2/3 of teachers indicating that they have trouble in these areas. But again, do not despair. This section was entitled A Path Forward, and I'm going to turn it over to Eyal to show and share this path.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, I could be the do not despair guy. There are really potent headwinds out there, and we also keep hearing from schools and systems that are saying that the pandemic has really raised their awareness about how important this work is, and they're looking for guidance on how to do it well. So that's why we call this report Unlocking the How, Designing Family Engagement Strategies that Lead to School Success. And so we've built a series of recommendations based on 3 primary sources. One is just the breadth and the years of longitudinal research that Learning Heroes has done. As you all well know, there's a treasure trove of data that's really insightful on the nature of the homeschool relationship. The other 2 are publications I recently or fairly recently co-authored with Dr. Karen Mapp. The first being the second version of her dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships, which really synthesizes the research on family engagement. And the final one is a report that we published last year called Embracing a New Normal Toward a More Liberatory Approach to Family Engagement, which was published by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. And that takes stock of this era of dual pandemics and offers some high-level policy recommendations. So what Unlocking the How does is it gets a little bit more granular than any of those. It says, what can I do on Monday morning for leaders that are wanting to try their hand at improving family engagement practice? And it has a lot of examples from schools and systems that are investing in what we call these 3 pillars of an effective strategy. One, that trust has to be at the base of any effective homeschool partnership. If you're not working on trust, you're going to miss the mark. 2, that student learning should be at the anchor of any effective family engagement practice so that we can close that gap between what parents know and what teachers know. And 3rd is that we have to build the systems and the infrastructure for this work, because as we can all see, systems have not really been designed for effective family engagement work, so they need to be redesigned for effective family engagement work. And as a former district leader, I understand that redesigning systems is no easy task. If we can go to the next slide. So you may have all received an announcement a little less than 2 weeks ago that in order to support the field in building the systems and structures necessary for this work to flourish, we've created a Family Engagement Leadership Institute that serves as a year-long professional learning experience for school and systems leaders to develop the skills and the experiences to build the mental models that will help them really create family engagement strategies that ultimately impact student learning and well-being. And so we're happy to touch base with anyone on this if anybody has any questions. But for now, I'll turn it back over to Bib.
Thank you so much, Eyal, and thank you guys all for the chat. I've been, caught up in a lot of the great comments and thoughts about all of the equity, and Tracy, your good points about, can we move the needle around an acknowledgement about family engagement? And again, as we saw at the very beginning, parents, teachers, and principals all agree family engagement in this sort of 2-way fashion isn't just essential for student success, but it's essential for COVID recovery. So I do think there's something really, this moment in time especially is important to grab a hold to, given, if we're going to listen to these really important actors and audiences, I think we can make progress, but there is a lot of work ahead. Really appreciate everyone's engagement and staying with us, and more to come. David will be back with amplification, and Kelsey as well. Thanks, guys.
Perfect.
Great to see everyone. Take care.